This is what I wanted to do from the time I was 5 years old, was hoist this trophy. And bringing it back to Louisiana, I guess we're in Louisiana, but staying in Louisiana, we weren't going to let someone come in here and steal this from us in our home state.
This team is going to be mentioned as one of the greatest teams in college football history, 15-0. One of the greatest teams in LSU history, led by some of the greatest players. Give them all the credit. But, that's for you guys to decide. We're national champs. Well, we're 15-0. Whether we mention it as one of the greatest teams or not, that doesn't matter to me.
Questions for Coach now?
Take it easy on that cigar, boy.
Well, it doesn't sound like Burrow took coach. They say he's coachable, but in this particular instance, doesn't sound like he was listening to his coach.
Boss. Love it. Boss.
That's a gift until the end of time at this point. And LSU's win last night, capping off a truly historic season. Perhaps nothing more impressive than their record against top opponents. They're the only team in the AP poll's history, which means going back to 1936, to beat all preseason top four in the same year. And I'll say it again. The last three were their last three games of the year. The other was Alabama on the road with Tua. So let's talk about, we've talked a lot about Burrow this morning, and we've done that. And we've talked a lot about their historic season. I want to spend a moment on Coach O, because this is perhaps the unlikeliest person ever to be sitting in the situation he is right now. Give a little background on who this guy is and how this happened.
This is not unlikely. And if you know him, it's not. It's unlikely to those who are outside. It's unlikely to those who didn't believe in him. I was standing on his balcony with him, and he told me about his morning prayer. And he said, I thank the Lord for this opportunity. I thank the Lord for this grass. He loves LSU that much. There's no place that he'd rather be. So when he sits in front of kids and he tells them to come to LSU, he's telling them to come be a part of his dream, to come be a part of his family, and that's important.
That's reasonable. That doesn't mean it isn't unlikely when you consider the history. Very quickly, Laura, for those who don't know the history of how he got this job and how close he came to losing it.
He was the interim head coach for LSU after Les Miles was let go, and there was a game that I actually was on the sideline for. It was the LSU A&M game on Thanksgiving of that year in 2017, and there were all these reports in the first quarter that LSU was hiring Tom Herman. Joe Oliva, the athletic director at the time, at the game, went up. I tried to get a comment from him. He, of course, denied the reports. There's a lot of stuff out there about whether or not they were actually going to get him, but it seemed like Tom Herman was going to be the coach at LSU. Of course, now he's at Texas, and Coach O wasn't going to get that job. Following the game, LSU won the game. You could see the heartbreak in Coach O's eyes at the point because he thought he had lost the job that he wanted so badly. Instead, they make the right decision and bring him in as their head coach.
I'll take it further, G, and I love the question about unlikely, because let's just call it what it is. We can talk about Ed Orgeron and people not thinking that his X's and O's and his grasp of being this intricate, detailed coach and putting plays on the whiteboard and impressing people in a room. There was also this sentiment that Ed Orgeron was dumb. That I'm going to just call it what it is. There was this whole idea of how he talked. He approaches that this guy can't lead a program because he hasn't done it. He was a D-line coach. See, USC wouldn't hire him because he didn't fit the culture on the West Coast. Well, he fit this one, and the LSU fans told you time and time again after every game with him as the interim coach that this was the guy to be the head coach. And it took a lot of things. Like, we can talk about the path that it took to get here, and we could blame people and we could say this had to transpire, and Tom Herman was only playing LSU to get the job to Texas. This happened to Ryan's point. This happened exactly how it was supposed to happen. And last night was Coach O's way of showing the people of Louisiana who really got him hired appreciation for putting him in that spot.
And so he gets in that spot, then he goes into the transfer portal and gets Joe Burrow, and the rest is history. Did we just watch the greatest season any college quarterback ever had?
There's not a conversation anymore. Yes, that was the greatest season we've ever watched a college quarterback have. Y'all grew up in the South, right? And y'all grew up in the church. You've heard the phrase, speak things into existence. Yeah. Joe Burrow did that this year. He spoke the national championship into existence. He spoke, we expected to be here, into existence. He spoke, we expect to perform at a level that college football has never seen before. And so the get of Joe Burrow, this isn't not The things that his teammates and his coaches are saying about him is not just in the moment. They're not just being nice because that's their quarterback. They truly believe it. They truly think that he's the most important LSU recruit ever, that he's the best LSU recruit that's ever gone to there, that he's changed LSU recruiting for the next 2 or 3 decades, and we just watched the greatest season ever.
And to that point, they carried him off the field against Alabama. Like, there will be people 10, 20 years from now that solely gives Joe Burrow the throne for beating Alabama. Laura and I have been inundated in SEC football. The worst thing about LSU and their fans, and even though they wouldn't admit it because pride wouldn't allow them to, is they knew when they get to November 5th that their season was over, that their national championship hopes would be done. We knew that. How long has it been that you knew at that point?
I said it when it happened, and people are happy right now, but beating Alabama was the happiest moment for LSU, for this university, for this state, because of what the history between LSU and Alabama is from a losing standpoint on our side.
I get it, and let's bring it back to Burrow then, because the reality is anyone who watched the game last night saw LSU has half the NFL standing on their sideline, but none of them are quarterbacks. And that's the point, that's what that basically LSU has not had. And you had the #1 pick in the draft at quarterback not that long ago in Jamarcus Russell, but generally speaking, they haven't had the quarterback, so that's what put it over the top.
It is, and I think it's worth also pointing out that Joe Burrow, the person, was a big reason behind all of this. He was the glue that held this team together through all of it. And if you look at what happened for him, he really is the most interesting man in all of college football. He's a guy that Greeny, if they don't get him in the transfer portal, they're not at this point. But then it was even further than that because he bought into himself before anybody else did. His dad retired this year so he could come and watch every single game for his son. Joe Burrow, you put him in a 3-point shooting contest, he can hit every single shot. The guy does every single thing that he's asked to do, but then some. And I think that's what the story is with him. He'll have a statue in Baton Rouge.
And Laura, it's funny Laura mentioned that because let's rewind 2 years ago before he made the decision. People wasn't beating the door down to get him there as their quarterback. Like, when Joe Burrow came to LSU, we were like, who the hell is this guy?
Why are you raising his hand?
Because as he had to win me over more than anybody. Joe Burrow he behaved the exact same way. You talked about speaking things into existence. That's how he was last year. He said a lot of these things. He felt a lot of these ways. But when you throw 16 touchdowns in 13 games, as an alum, as a former player, I don't want to hear it. Stop talking. Just play. And so when I watched him in training camp and I look at a scout next to me and I said, those were 5 NFL throws in a row. And he says, hell yeah, I didn't know he had that. And then when I come on and I stand behind Fonbaum and I argue with him over Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence for the Heisman, it wasn't because I liked him. It was because I watched him play and I watched him progress and I watched him work and I saw who he had become as a player. This dude not only changed how people looked at LSU football, he actually changed what LSU football was. For so long, we wanted to beat your face in and be more physical. Now we were smarter. Now we were more intricate. Now we executed better, and it's because of number 9.
I asked the question this. In the historicity of the sport, I want people to think of who authored a better story. I know there's going to be some in the conversation, but Joe Burrow just authored an incredible story for college football, not just LSU. Like, we're celebrating LSU today as we should, but this is like a story of college football. And I can't recall, I'm only 36, but like one that's been better. And also, your tweet to Chason last night when Chason said, I don't want this story to end, and you replied, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
This gets told forever. Yeah. That, like, there is something to that because of Joe Burrow and everybody, this story of this season gets told forever.
Yeah, and for everyone on that side, there's obviously the flip side last night. I want to talk about the other quarter. I shouldn't say it that way. Let's talk about the brilliant Trevor Lawrence, who did not have his best night last night.
Much more of his story to write, Greeny, and he did have a rough outing at times. Clemson was only 1 of 11 on third down tries, and as for Lawrence, it was the second time in his career he failed to throw at least 1 touchdown pass in a game, while also bringing his 25-game winning streak as a starter to an end. Here he is following it.
You know, you get so busy looking for what's next, and, you know, a moment like this happens, and you got to man, it sucks, but you got to look back on what you've done, and we've done some great things, and we got a lot more in store ahead for sure.
We won 29 games in a row, and sooner or later you're going to lose one. It certainly wasn't the one we wanted to lose, but I know how we'll respond. We'll get back to work, and you can't win two till you win one.
Lawrence started the game off strong with over 100 yards in the first quarter alone. After that, it did start to go downhill for the previously undefeated quarterback. For the rest of the game, he completed less than 50% of his passes and had many notable overthrows. Ryan, in our first hour, you brought this up, saying that Dabo Swinney had said to the masses that Trevor Lawrence had everything that Deshaun Watson had, comparing his two great quarterbacks. You're not buying that. Why?
Well, I just think Deshaun Watson had some intangibles that we were able to see throughout a career that says that Trevor Lawrence isn't there yet. And I'm not saying that I don't recognize his unicorn-like talent, the measurables. I see all of those things. But in the biggest moments, the reason we were all so perplexed that Mitchell Trubisky and even Patrick Mahomes went before Deshaun Watson, because on the biggest stage, all we saw him do was be the best player in college football. Yeah. And we saw it on two different occasions. And so I've watched Trevor Lawrence. I saw him when he was 18 years old, and this is another 7-on-7 story. I had the greatest opening 7-on-7 defense to ever be created. I was doing Dave Aranda, Brett Venables type stuff in the 7-on-7, and he made some throws, and I was like, and the boys looked at me, I said, I don't know what the hell to tell you. We can't stop him. And so I agree with all those things, but then I watch him on the field, and I see the Syracuse, and I see North Carolina, and I see different games, and I see last night, and I say, okay, a little bit is missing. I watched Ohio State, and I had more respect for him for this reason. I didn't think he played great, but he showed grit. It wasn't about talent. It wasn't about what I can do with my arm, my height. It was like, I'm going to find a way to win. I think he has a long way to go to be in Deshaun Watson type of clutch, make something out of nothing, because this team, Hunter Renfrow, who I think is a good pro, no disrespect to him. When you look at Higgins and you look at Ross, he doesn't play on this team the way he plays on Deshaun Watson's team. Travis Etienne wasn't on that team. Deshaun Watson was fighting with less. Deshaun Watson is the reason they have those recruits.
Listen, you know I love you, but I'm not going to sit here and let the Trevor Lawrence slander happen. I mean, so we talk about moments.
Slanders are lies. It's not a lie.
We talk about moments. This is a kid that dragged Alabama in the national title last year. Like, that is a moment where he outplays Tua in Alabama, slayed the Giant last year. This is the kid that 2 weeks ago knocked off Ohio State when they were getting beat up and had to find a different way to win. And we're talking about Deshaun Watson. Remember, that season that Deshaun Watson did that to Alabama was his junior year. I promise you. Mark my words, Trevor Lawrence is going to come back next year as a dog, and he will win the Heisman.
But the year they lost, Deshaun Watson was the best player in that game as well.
He will win the Heisman. He will be the #1 pick. We will be talking about Trevor Lawrence next year the way we are referencing Joe Burrow and the way we did Deshaun Watson like in the past, because he's a sophomore. He's a sophomore, and he's been great his whole career. And in the national title, he wasn't good.
Dan, he hasn't been great his whole career. Right, and that's a thing. I think that's a point.
He has.
No, listen. When we came into the season, we were giving him the trophy. We went to South Carolina with the Heisman and say, "Bruh, just keep this at your house and bring it to New York."
Because of what he did as a freshman.
Right. Because of what he did as a freshman in one game. When we watched Ross make pirouettes, he was 18-4 from a touchdown to interception ratio. Right. But even when he replaced Kelly Bryant, we didn't necessarily think he played great. When they won the Texas A&M game, Kelly Bryant came in for the last drive. And so I'm not saying that you are wrong about the discussion we will have at this time next year. I, too, think he has a remarkable foundation. I think his floor is higher than any floor I've ever seen in person. What I'm saying is, when you watch him, there is something missing. And when something is missing, you have to find it eventually. And it doesn't show up every night like it showed up and he's a kid. I get it. We talked about this last night.
Right.
We had the conversation that the Joe Burrow we see It's Trevor Lawrence's second year in the league. I understand he gets to grow. I'm saying right now we're heaping too much praise on a kid who I don't think has earned it.
Let me get Swagoo in this quickly because all of it can be true at the same time. He can be a great player who had a bad night and has not always been perfect, who is a legit sophomore. He was a freshman a year ago. But the schedule also, you think, played a factor in this?
I think it does. I'm a big proponent of competition. LSU was down 17-7 against Clemson. They weren't down 17-7 to Texas A&M or Ole Miss or Mississippi State, and we said it's a fluke, or like the Texans took a lead on the Chiefs. Just like we knew Patrick Mahomes would eventually come back, we knew last night that eventually LSU would make a run and get themselves back into that game. So I think a part of that played into Trevor Lawrence saying, hey, man, this is not that easy. 2 weeks in a row, because if we go back to Ohio State could have jumped out on the big lead. This is not to slander Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence is going to be great. What I'm